In today's episode, we're looking at 5 shark attacks that weren't just tragic, they were downright dumb. From a teen in Australia who ignored shark warnings for a video, to a cliff diver in South Africa who jumped into a known hunting ground. But first, we begin off the coast of Florida, where one man's drunken leap into dark waters turned a night of fun into his final mistake. July 16, 2016 was heavy and hot off the coast of Key West, Florida. The air sat thick over the ocean, turning the sea surface into a glassy mirror that reflected the moonlight in long, broken strips. A private catamaran floated quietly just beyond the reef line, anchored in a feeding channel known to local captains as a place to avoid after dark. Here, in the deeper cuts between sandbars and limestone shelves, the tides pushed bait fish through narrow passages, bringing larger predators with them. Beneath the calm surface, the current churned with activity, and above, on the deck of a rented party boat, no one was thinking about what swam below. Tyler Grimshaw was 27 and restless, the kind of person who always needed movement. He worked odd jobs around Tampa, construction, seasonal landscaping, sometimes delivery driving, but rarely stayed in one role for long. He liked people, attention, and adventure, especially the kind that involved pushing limits. His friends called him fearless. Others might have called him impulsive. He was athletic, outgoing, and known for taking risks that made everyone nervous but usually ended in laughter. He didn't have a death wish, he just didn't believe anything bad would happen. The boat had been rented to celebrate a friend's birthday with nearly 20 guests on board. As night fell, music played from a small speaker, red plastic cups lined the railing, and the catamaran glowed under deck lights that cut sharp edges across the water. It was meant to be a night of drinking and dancing beneath the stars. Most of the guests stayed close to the center of the boat, barefoot and relaxed, enjoying the breeze and the open air. Tyler, however, wasn't the type to stay on the sidelines. He'd been drinking heavily for hours, bouncing between groups, louder and more animated with each passing hour. The waters around Key West are rich with marine life, but certain deep channels beyond the reef are known danger zones. Transition points between shallow flats and deeper hunting grounds where predators thrive. Few are more suited to these murky, brackish waters than the bull shark, large, territorial, and highly aggressive. Unlike great whites or tiger sharks, bull sharks can tolerate fresh water and hunt with precision in low visibility. Measuring up to 11 feet and weighing over 500 pounds, they strike with over 1,300 pounds of bite force. Fast, relentless, and easily triggered by the splash and thrash of a human in the dark. Just before 10 p.m., Tyler climbed up onto the guardrail, arms wide, and dove headfirst into the dark. The music kept playing. A few people laughed, others panicked. The water swallowed him in an instant, and for a few moments he was visible, treading water, backstroking, calling out as he swam just beyond the reach of the deck lights. People shouted for him to come back. Some moved toward the edge of the boat, trying to spot him in the dark. But Tyler kept swimming deeper into the shadows. Then something changed. A sharp splash echoed from the far side of the boat, followed by a single sharp cry. It was short, abrupt, and loud enough to make the music seem suddenly distant. When the spotlight swept the water, Tyler was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no flailing limbs, no second scream. Just a swirl in the water and a torn piece of fabric that floated up seconds later. One of Tyler's friends, sober enough to act, grabbed a phone and called the Coast Guard. On deck, the captain pulled the boat away from the spreading blood as guests shouted Tyler's name into the dark, scanning the waves with flashlights. No one jumped in. The water was too black, too still. For nearly 20 minutes they searched, circling the deck, tossing life rings, sweeping the surface with spotlights. But Tyler was gone. Rescue boats launched from shore with helicopters overhead within the hour. Divers entered before dawn using floodlights and sonar to comb the seabed. The crew gave detailed statements about the timing and location, but by the next afternoon, only a sneaker and a torn strip of shirt had been found. Blood in the water confirmed what officials already suspected. Tyler had likely been taken by a bull shark, drawn to the sound and thrashing in a known feeding corridor. His body was never recovered. The shark was never identified or pursued. Tyler's death stunned his family and friends. A memorial was held in Tampa that weekend, with a collage of photos displayed near a folded t-shirt and an untouched drink from the party that never ended. The service was quiet. Some were angry, most were just bewildered. Tyler had always seemed invincible until he wasn't. The reality was hard to ignore. He made a reckless choice, diving into predator-filled waters at night while drunk, ignoring every warning from the people around him. Tyler Grimshaw vanished into black water before anyone could pull him back. But for Liam Norwick, it wasn't darkness or alcohol that sealed his fate. It was ego, a camera, and a great white shark lurking just beyond the buoy line. August 19, 2018 was warm and windless along Australia's northern coast. The sun hung low over Byron Bay, casting long shadows across the empty shoreline where red warning flags flapped idly in the breeze. A lifeguard truck sat locked behind the gates of a closed beach access road, and beyond it, clear signage read, "Beach closed. Shark sightings reported. No swimming." The warning had been in place for days, issued after multiple drone patrols recorded a large great white patrolling just offshore. But late that afternoon, 5 teenagers ducked under the gate and made their way down the sand, laughing, filming, and ignoring everything they'd been told. 17-year-old Liam Norwick had planned the moment all week. He wasn't a thrill-seeker in the traditional sense. He didn't skydive or surf, but he lived for the kind of content that turned heads on social media. His friends called him the main character, partly in jest, partly because Liam leaned into it. At school, he was the one narrating lunchtime stories with perfect comedic timing. Online, he'd film fake stunts, reaction videos, and clips of himself getting chased by public security guards. He wanted attention, and that afternoon, he had a plan to get footage of himself swimming past the closed-zone buoys, throw in some muscle flexing and jokes, and maybe go viral for pushing the rules. The group set up their phones in the sand just beyond the flagged zone. Liam stripped off his shirt, grinned for the camera, and waded into the surf with exaggerated flexes and mock bravado. He shouted something about not being scared of fish before diving through a shallow wave and surfacing a few yards out. One phone zoomed in, another captured behind-the-scenes commentary. None of them noticed the ripple near the second buoy. A few moments later, the water behind Liam exploded in a violent splash. His scream was sharp and short-lived, loud enough to startle the group into silence. Then he vanished. What no one had seen just beneath the surface was the strike of a great white shark. These apex predators are ambush hunters capable of reaching over 15 feet in length and weighing upwards of 2,000 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch, enough to sever limbs or split a seal in two. In murky coastal waters like those near Byron Bay, they hunt by silhouette, tracking prey from below and launching upward with devastating speed. Drone footage from earlier that week had confirmed one patrolling the area, and the beach had been closed for a reason. It was a known hunting corridor, made even more dangerous by the splash, motion, and noise of a lone swimmer breaking the surface. At first, Liam's friends thought he was playing. The camera kept rolling, but when he didn't resurface, his closest friend sprinted into the water, yelling his name. What he found was a cloud of blood spreading in slow spirals and a strip of fabric, part of Liam's board shorts floating on the surface. Panic broke out. One boy ran toward the access road to get a signal and call for help. Another collapsed on the beach, screaming into his hands. Phones were dropped, voices cracked, and the laughter that had filled the air just minutes before was gone. Paramedics arrived 30 minutes later, but there was nothing left to do. The boys had pulled Liam back toward shore, but he had already lost too much blood. His leg had been severed at the hip. The great white had bitten once and vanished, textbook behavior for a large shark mistaking prey. The medical report later confirmed what responders already knew. Liam had bled out within minutes of the attack. The location matched drone footage from earlier that week, confirming the presence of the same shark that had triggered the original beach closure. Despite the warnings, despite the signs, he jumped in anyway. Video from the day circulated briefly before being taken down. It wasn't graphic, it showed Liam flexing, swimming, laughing. But it captured the lead-up so clearly that investigators used it to piece together the timeline. Interviews with the group revealed the pattern. They knew the beach was closed, they thought the warning was overblown, and they never imagined something could go so wrong so quickly. The attack reignited national debate about digital culture, teenage risk-taking, and the growing trend of dangerous stunts staged for social media clout. A memorial was held at Liam's high school gymnasium the following Friday. Hundreds attended. Students, teachers, local families. His parents didn't speak, but his younger brother read from a list of things Liam had planned to do. Study abroad, start a clothing brand, get a tattoo their mom wouldn't approve of. Friends described him as funny, loyal, full of energy, and always looking for the next big moment. There was no villain to prosecute. The beach had been closed, the warnings were obvious, and the shark had acted as nature intended. What made it harder to accept was how avoidable it all was. Liam didn't die because of bad luck, he died because he made a reckless choice, ignoring every posted sign and every recent report for the sake of a stunt. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a chain of impulsive decisions that ended exactly the way experts warn they can. And now, his story is told as a reminder of what happens when thrill wins out over sense. Liam's story ended with a single catastrophic strike from one of the ocean's most efficient predators. But Jordan Macefield pushed his luck even further, cliff diving near a seal colony in Cape Town, where great whites patrol the surf for anything that moves. March 14, 2015 was clear and windless along the rugged coastline of Duker Point, just south of Cape Town. The Atlantic shimmered with deceptive calm, lapping gently against the base of towering cliffs that had become a magnet for thrill seekers. The waves slapped rhythmically against the rocks, birds wheeled overhead, and on top of the cliff a group of university students stood barefoot in the sun, daring each other toward the edge. They weren't tourists, they were locals. They knew the coast, knew the rumors, and knew that below them the water churned with currents colder and deeper than it looked. But that afternoon, they didn't care. The plan was simple: cliff diving. No wetsuits, no gear, just a quick plunge into the open ocean and a scramble back onto the rocks. Among them was 22-year-old Jordan Macefield, tall, athletic, and the kind of extrovert people naturally followed. Jordan had always leaned into risk. He was the one who suggested Duker Point in the first place. The area had a reputation known for its dramatic rock faces and deep entry points. It offered one of the few spots where you could jump from over 30 feet into the ocean without hitting reef or sand. But it also carried another much darker reputation. The nearby rocks were home to a seal colony, dozens of slick barking bodies that sunbathed on the shoreline and slipped like shadows into the water. And where there are seals in the Cape, there are great white sharks. The group knew this. Signs had been posted a year earlier after multiple shark sightings, warning against swimming or diving in the area. Local rangers had updated the advisory list just 2 days before, noting increased predatory activity in the shallows. But by the time Jordan and his friends arrived that morning, the surf was low, the cliffs were dry, and the temptation was stronger than the caution. One by one, the group began to jump. Jordan was last. He raised his arms, shouted something no one quite heard, and hurled himself off the ledge. He hit the water cleanly and surfaced a moment later, grinning and throwing his fist in the air. The others cheered from above. But then, without warning, something massive surged from below. There was no splash, no warning fin, just a violent jolt that pulled Jordan backward under the surface as if a rope had been yanked from the deep. A few seconds passed, then the water near the jump site turned red. Great white sharks are deeply woven into the marine ecosystem of South Africa's Western Cape. Dierker Point, just south of Cape Town, lies along the edge of what's known as the Shark Alley Corridor, where cold Benguela currents meet rich breeding grounds for seals, tuna, and other prey. Here, great whites don't migrate through, they stay. Scientists have tracked the same individuals returning year after year, using coastal shelves and sea colonies as ambush points. Their hunting relies on stealth. They strike upward, fast and silent, using the contrast of sunlight on the surface to target silhouettes. In areas like this, where rocky outcrops host hundreds of seals, and human activity overlaps with feeding zones, a splash in the wrong place can look exactly like a kill trigger. Jordan had leapt into the center of their territory. At first, the group thought it was a prank. Jordan was known for stunts, and the sudden disappearance looked staged. But when he didn't resurface and when a second cloud of blood appeared, darker and wider than the first, the mood shifted. Screaming erupted. One of the students tried to climb down the cliff toward the shoreline while another ran for cell reception. A third called emergency services as the rest stared helplessly at the calm surface where their friend had vanished just seconds earlier. Rescue teams arrived within the hour. The National Sea Rescue Institute launched a search using boats, divers, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the coastline for hours. No body was ever found. A single torn swim fin was recovered near the edge of the seal rocks, but beyond that, there was nothing. Officials confirmed that shark activity had been recorded in the area days earlier and reiterated that Dierker Point had never been a sanctioned diving location. A temporary restriction was issued, and signs were reposted with more prominent warnings. Jordan's University held a memorial later that week. Flowers, stories, and a worn photo of him mid-jump on a hiking trip, suspended in the air with his arms wide open. Friends remembered him as fearless, impulsive, and always chasing the next thrill. But even those closest to him admitted he pushed too far. He saw the warnings and jumped anyway. Jordan leapt into water he should have avoided and never surfaced again. Amber Keplar did the same, sprinting into the shallows for a midnight swim, unaware that a bull shark was already circling just offshore. June 15, 2013 was the kind of Florida evening that felt like it could last forever. On a stretch of beach near Marathon in the Florida Keys, college students gathered around a fire pit, the air thick with salt, smoke, and cheap beer. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker half buried in the sand. Laughter came easy. The stars were bright, it was a summer break. And for Amber Keplar, 21, this was exactly the kind of night she lived for. But some waters, no matter how calm they seem, are never safe to step into, especially when the sun goes down. Amber had driven down from Tallahassee with 3 friends to celebrate the end of finals. She was loud in the best way, with sun-bleached hair, chipped nail polish, and a tendency to burst into song when no one expected it. A journalism major with a part-time waitressing job, she wasn't the type to play it safe. She was the type who jumped in without checking the water. Just before midnight, with most of the group winding down or passed out in camp chairs, Amber and her closest friend Lizzie, still buzzed from drinks and glowing with that carefree recklessness unique to 20-somethings on vacation, decided to skinny dip. It wasn't a dare, it wasn't planned. They just looked at each other, grinned, and ran for the surf, peeling off clothes and tossing them behind as they laughed their way down the sand. Locals had long avoided that particular inlet after dark, not because of tides or currents, but because the nearby dockside fish cleaning stations leaked into the shallows, drawing predators close. But sharks especially were known to patrol the warm coastal waters at night, hunting in silence just beyond the moonlit foam. Bull sharks are among the few large shark species that actively hunt in shallow coastal waters, and at night they become even more dangerous. With poor light to navigate by, they rely on vibration and movement, zeroing in on splashes that mimic struggling fish or injured prey. Unlike great whites that stalk from the deep, bull sharks patrol close to shore, sometimes in less than 3 feet of water. They're territorial, quick to react, and bold enough to strike without hesitation. For swimmers unaware or careless, the line between safe and fatal can disappear in seconds. The two girls waded in waist deep, their laughter echoing into the dark. Amber splashed ahead, arms raised, spinning as she fell backward into the water. Her friend stayed closer to shore, shivering from the sudden chill and hesitating from the sudden quiet. Then Amber screamed. It wasn't drawn out, it was sharp, immediate, and followed by thrashing so violent it sent water spraying in all directions. Lizzie turned in time to see Amber's leg disappear beneath the surface. Then her entire body dragged several feet into the deeper channel. She surfaced once, eyes wide, gasping, but the water around her was already tinted with blood. Lizzie swam back to shore in a panic, screaming for help. A few others ran toward the surf, confused, still half drunk. One tried to wade in, but the water was clouded and opaque, the tide pushing against him with eerie calm. Someone called 911 from a cell phone held aloft with shaking hands. Amber washed up 12 minutes later, pulled in by the tide. She was barely conscious, her leg torn open from thigh to knee, her body in shock. Paramedics arrived less than 10 minutes after that, but by then she had lost too much blood. CPR was attempted on the sand, lights flashing against pale faces and glass bottles, but her pulse never returned. She was declared dead at the scene. Officials identified the bite pattern as consistent with a bull shark, likely an adult male, drawn to the noise and motion in a shallow feeding zone. No search for the shark was initiated. The beach was temporarily closed and additional warning signs were installed along the access path. Local anglers had reported frequent shark presence for weeks prior, but without a specific threat, no formal action had been taken. Amber's friends packed up the next morning and drove home in silence. Her family held a small memorial at a marina near their home in Clearwater, where she'd grown up learning to swim, dive, and push boundaries just enough to keep life interesting. She was remembered for her laugh, her boldness, and her habit of diving in without always checking how deep the water was. The beach reopened, the fire pit was cleaned, the tide rolled on like nothing had happened. But for the people who were there that night, it wasn't the shark they remembered, it was the decision, one that never should have been made. Amber's death left her friends frozen in shock. Derek Wincombe had no one nearby, just a spear gun, a trail of chum, and the open reef, where a tiger shark likely mistook his silhouette for a meal. April 11, 2022 was humid and gray off the southern coast of Bali. The tide was steady, the surf gentle, and visibility already dropping as morning rain clouds built along the horizon. Most locals stayed out of the water on days like that, especially near the deeper reef shelves where currents shift and predators roam. But to 30-year-old Derek Wincombe, it was perfect. He'd flown in from California the week before, chasing adventure on a 6-month break from his job in web development. Friends back home followed his every move online. Clips of him freediving in cenotes, balancing on narrow ridge trails, grilling seafood on remote beaches. The next post was supposed to be his best yet, filmed alone in murky water, surrounded by bait. Derek was the kind of person who craved intensity. He wasn't reckless in the way people usually meant. He researched gear, read travel advisories, and talked to locals. But once he felt confident, he didn't hesitate. He thrived on doing what others wouldn't, hiking into active volcano zones, spearfishing without a partner, diving into dark water for the rush of it. Friends called him bold. His parents called him stubborn. Derek called it living. The waters off southern Bali are beautiful but dangerous in ways that don't always show on the surface. Beneath the bright shallows lie drop-offs that plunge hundreds of feet, where tiger sharks, oceanic whitetips, and other predators roam. Rainfall brings silt and runoff from inland, reducing visibility to just a few feet. And when tourists chum the water, cutting baitfish to lure in bigger species for photos or sport, it blurs the line between curiosity and risk. Locals knew better. Derek didn't listen. Derek rented gear from a local dive shack and set out alone just after 9 a.m., a short scooter ride from his guest house. Locals who saw him off didn't say much, just exchanged looks. Most fishermen avoided solo spearfishing runs, especially in murky conditions. It wasn't just the reduced visibility, it was what reduced visibility attracted. Derek, however, was undeterred. He strapped on his GoPro, secured his spear gun, and paddled out with a mesh bag of chopped baitfish dangling from his hip. Chum he planned to use to draw in action for the camera. The reef drop-off where Derek chose to dive was known for tiger sharks and oceanic whitetips. These aren't the slow gliding shadows seen from boats, they're bold, curious apex predators, drawn in by movement, scent, and the vibrations of a wounded fish. Oceanic whitetips in particular have a history of aggressive behavior toward isolated swimmers, especially when bait is in the water. They hunt high in the water column and are known to circle, bump, and strike. Tiger sharks, sometimes called the garbage cans of the sea, are even less discriminating. At over 14 feet long, they can deliver over 1,300 pounds of bite force and often mistake thrashing limbs for prey. In the open ocean, alone and chumming, Derek was mimicking the very things those sharks were designed to find. Derek Wincombe entered the water alone, spear gun in hand, off a remote reef shelf south of Bali. He'd ignored local warnings, skipped hiring a guide, and dragged a pouch of cut bait behind him for dramatic underwater footage. At first, things seemed quiet. Fish darted past, the water glowed green in the filtered light, but visibility dropped fast. As he descended, shadows began to flicker. A tiger shark appeared first, circling slowly. Then another form moved below, smaller, quicker. Derek steadied his grip. The first hit came without warning, a shoulder check that knocked the spear gun loose. Then the real strike followed. Jaws clamped onto his leg, dragging him into a spiral of blood and sand. He kicked, thrashed, tried to reach for the surface, but the current and weight of the animal overpowered him completely. When he failed to return, a search party found only torn wetsuit scraps and a broken spear gun floating near the reef. Derek's body was never recovered. No footage survived, no witnesses saw what happened. Just a series of poor choices in the wrong place. Diving alone, chumming the water, ignoring every warning. And an ocean that doesn't give second chances. When Derek failed to check out of his guest house, the host alerted a local dive shack who confirmed he'd gone out alone that morning and hadn't returned. A small search launched at dawn turned up only his broken spear gun, a torn piece of wetsuit, and his GoPro. Experts reviewing the footage concluded a large shark, likely a tiger or oceanic whitetip, had struck fast and fatally. With no flotation, no dive partner, and no backup, Derek never had a chance. Local fishermen, though saddened, weren't surprised. Shark activity in that reef was common, especially during the rainy season when runoff clouded the water and baitfish gathered. Warning signs were posted, and guides regularly cautioned against solo spearfishing or chumming. Derek's family flew in to collect his belongings, but no remains were ever found. Back in California, friends held a beach memorial placing flowers beside a screenshot from his last trip. Derek had been bold, curious, and thrill-seeking, but he'd ignored every rule, diving alone, baiting predators, entering murky waters without support. They weren't the kind of mistakes experienced divers make, just the kind you don't get to make twice. Thanks for watching this video. If you love this video, you'll definitely also love the one on your end screen right now. Hope to see you there.